Up next on the Calm and Free podcast, in collaboration with the World Happiness Fest, Dr. Andrew Harman, Professor of Virology and Immunology at the University of Sydney.
One of the reasons it's difficult is because we can't accept reality for what it is. We want things to be different to the way they are. The problem is, if you pick a battle with reality, you're never going to win.
You're listening to the Calm and Free podcast with your host, Pooja Model. In this podcast, we deliver timeless wisdom to help you calmly pursue your greatest self and a life of meaning in an ever-changing, fast-paced world. Welcome to the Calm and Free podcast.
Our special guest today is Dr. Andrew Harman, a professor of virology and immunology at the University of Sydney School of Medicine, and an ordained Buddhist who has much insight on how Buddhist practices and philosophy can help us deal with change, restlessness, and uncertainty in our fast-moving world. He shares how acceptance of your reality can help bring about calm. In this very special discussion, Dr. Harman also answers how advanced science and Buddhism go hand in hand, why Vipassana meditation may not work for some, and how Einstein may be the best role model in helping us see how spirituality or religion can add value along with science in helping us live with more grace, rootedness, and compassion. If you've been enjoying these episodes, please text or email today's episode to a friend and tell them to subscribe. And please consider attending the World Happiness Fest, taking place virtually and in person in Spain, March 17th through 22nd, where you will be joined by thousands of others who are realizing the future of happiness. Visit their website at worldhappiness.foundation. Without further ado, Dr. Andrew Harman. You are a professor of virology and immunology at the University of Sydney. You are also an ordained Buddhist. And in these COVID times, particularly, and in this rapidly changing world that we're living in, it seems though people are searching for happiness and inner peace. And we've been at this search since time immemorial, but it seems like it has become ever more increasingly salient in these very particular times and special times. And Buddhism, it seems, has some great insights to help us find that inner peace in all of this chaos. I'd love to start off, if we may, kind of getting your journey, understanding your journey to Buddhism. I understand that you moved to Southeast Asia after you graduated from university in the UK, and your curiosity led you to this path. I'd love to hear about kind of how that unfolded for you.
Yeah, I think I was brought up a Christian. I didn't have a particularly negative experience of Christianity. I know many people have, as is the case with many religions, but mine wasn't a particularly negative one. But I remember at quite a young age, perhaps maybe 7 or 8, possibly 10, I don't know, it's hard to know exactly, isn't it, with your childhood. But I remember just being very, very clear that I didn't believe in God. I don't know how that arose, but I just really felt clear that I didn't believe it. I was always very interested in it. And in fact, right up into my high school years, I continued to study religion and Christianity and even the Bible because I found it interesting. I've always found religion fascinating, but I've never believed in a creator God. And I think what happened was I became very nihilistic. That basically, once you're dead, the lights go out, and that's the end of it. And I think I think that left a bit of a hole in me, a bit of an existential void, if you like. And I became very interested in science. I've always loved science, as searching for truth. But for me, although I could see that religion provided a psychological security That belief that when you die, you will carry on and there's a God who loves you, etc. I could see how that's very appealing for people, but for me, I just couldn't believe it, and I wasn't willing to believe it. And then when I was traveling in Southeast Asia, as you say, after my my university degree in biology, I came across Buddhism, and I was sitting on a bus, in fact, in Laos, and I'd finished my book, and I was quite bored. It was one of those kind of long 8 or 9 hour bus journeys, so I thought I'll read the introduction to the Lonely Planet book. And so it wasn't even a Buddhist who had written it. And there was a section on Buddhism, and it just outlined the basics. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized that there was such a thing as a religion that didn't require blind faith, that didn't require, a belief in a supernatural being who created everything and who controls our lives, etc. And I think there was that part of me that was looking for more, really leapt out of my heart and thought, this is just fantastic. And then from that moment on, I read a lot about Buddhism, and I really just felt I was coming home. I just felt it just made complete sense to me. It didn't contradict any of my scientific, education and upbringing, and it just all made sense to me. And I really, from that moment on, almost considered myself a Buddhist. And yes, I did then learn to meditate, and I got involved with a particular Buddhist movement, which at the time was called Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. It's now called Triratna, and I trained for ordination and became ordained. So yeah, I guess that's my path in a nutshell.
Yes. And we know that the Four Noble Truths, which are the main tenets of Buddhism, they make us aware of this idea that the cause of our suffering is craving. And an end to that suffering comes with an end to craving. And, I think about this a lot in a world today where societal norms stress this material external measure of success, where consumer culture cajoles us to want, to crave title, status, things, money, which keep us out of the present moment, and they keep us attached. And we're in an age where that has never been so extreme. I'd love to get your thoughts on, and this suits so well with the Buddhist Noble Truths, this concept and the juxtaposition to what we're facing in society today. I'd love to get your view on that, on this idea that we're almost forced in a way into craving.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think there is we definitely live in a society which is, as you say, highly consumer driven, and we're constantly bombarded by advertisements that if only you buy this brand of toothbrush, you'll be really happy, and if you live in this suburb as opposed to that one, or this model of car opposed to that one, and we're endlessly bombarded by if you buy this, you'll be happy. And of course, we never are. I mean, even though the evidence is in front of our eyes, that it never does, in fact, make us happy. I mean, obviously, it does give us a temporary relief from suffering, or we wouldn't do it. But it doesn't last very long. So, yeah, I think there's definitely that is a very unhealthy aspect, I think, to our consumer society. But I think we can't just blame it on society. I think it is genetically hardwired into us. We want to experience pleasure as human beings. We need, whether we're living in, this period of history or 2,000 years ago, or whether we're living in communist China or Australia, or it's fundamentally we have the same human mind, which craves happiness and craves pleasure. And I think this is where the Four Noble Truths are so important. Is that fundamental truth that those things won't bring us happiness. And I don't think it's not just it's not just craving for material things, but I think what it fundamentally comes down to is that reality is inherently painful. I mean, I've personally yet to meet a human being, however privileged they may appear to be, who doesn't experience life as a struggle. I think life is a struggle for all of us. Yes, there are definitely times in our life where there are joys and there's really wonderful things that happen, and there's times that we're really happy. But nevertheless, life is a struggle. Life is difficult. Marriage is difficult. Being a parent is difficult. Building your career is difficult. Paying off your mortgage is difficult. All of these things, it doesn't matter how easy people tell us they're going to be, they're not. Life is difficult. And I think one of the reasons it's difficult is because we can't accept reality for what it is. We want things to be different to the way they are. But the problem is, if you pick a battle with reality, you're never going to win. So I think so much of the Four Noble Truths is also about just accepting that that's the way life is. Just accepting that we do grow old, our bodies do become harder to live in. The world is never going to be the way we want it to be, and just giving up that battle. So I think acceptance is a really, really important part of the Four Noble Truths. So really, it's the craving for things to be different to the way they are, which is that really fundamental cause of our suffering, because they won't ever be the way we want them to.
And that ties into this idea of impermanence.
Absolutely.
And this idea of, attachment to things that are what we want them to be permanent, but they never are. And so this idea of really embracing impermanence is a vehicle for us to release, let go, and be able to deal with suffering.
That's right. As you say, I mean, it's one of the things that I really like about Buddhism, is that it accepts the fact. Yes, you're right. It starts from the fact that, as you say, everything's impermanent. Everything is in a constant state of flux. So, by definition, if something is impermanent, it can't bring us a reliable sense of security. And of course, that extends to our relationships, our cars, our families, other people, our own life. Everything is in a state of flux. So when we become attached to something for our psychological security, it can't provide that, at least in a lasting fashion, but because it is subject to change. Mm-hmm. And again, that's very that's in line with science. I mean, this is what science also tells us, that everything is in a continuous state of change.
It's an absolute beautiful insight, really, yet so hard for people to manage. I want to read you a beautiful quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. As you know, he recently passed, beloved Zen master, and in my mind, possibly one of the greatest Buddhist leaders and figures in our life, in our era. He said, many people think excitement is happiness, but when you are excited, you are not peaceful. True happiness is based on peace. And I wanted to bring this up to you because to me, it's a very powerful idea, because we are so lulled into wanting to be excited and feeling that excitable memories, excitable experiences are what we need. And actually what he's saying is those like we're talking about are never permanent, and wanting and craving those will get us not very far.
Yeah, I mean, I would, it would be difficult to put things more eloquently than Thich Nhat Hanh. But absolutely. I think this is one of the problems that we have in the West. I was listening to actually something in Australia on Radio National recently. There was a whole hour documentary on what is happiness, and there's so many different things that happiness can mean. But you're right, that sense of excitement and when your mind is agitated, yes, it does feel very nice. But I, as you say, there's a very beautiful sutta where the Buddha's stepmother asks the Buddha, "What is your teaching?" In a nutshell, I've heard all these different, interpretations of your teaching, but in a nutshell, what does it mean? And the Buddha basically says, whatever makes your mind peaceful and calm, that is my teaching. That's a slight simplification of the sutta, but I think that's absolutely right. I think what we mean as Buddhists by happiness is contentment and calm, and a state of peace. A state of peace.
Isn't that interesting that we define success in an unhealthy way, and we also, it seems, define happiness in an unhealthy way, and that perhaps needs to be re-examined. What is happiness?
I think absolutely it does, and I know there's lots of research that's actually going on this at the moment. But I agree. I think we need to be clear what happiness means. And I think one of the things I like about Buddhism, as opposed to, say, Western psychology, is Buddhism has lots of words to define these different positive mental states. Whereas if you look at Western psychology, for example, we have lots and lots and lots of different definitions for unpleasant states of mind, for various levels of anxiety and depression and psychosis. And there's all these hundreds of different terms that we can subdivide all these painful states of mind, but we don't have many words, we don't have much vocabulary to talk about all the different shades of things like happiness and contentment and peace and joy, which is when you look at the Pali and the Sanskrit words, Buddhism has a much wider plethora of terms to differentiate, exactly as you're saying, between these different things. And in Buddhism, it's quite clear that sensual pleasure, or sukha, is considered a negative mental event. It may well feel pleasant, but it's a negative mental event. Whereas things like calm and contentment are positive mental events. Ultimately, what Buddhism is aiming to achieve is a sense of equanimity.
Yeah,
I think equanimity is the best word to use, which is a state of just when your mind, regardless of what chaos is going on around you, you can keep that mental composure, you can keep that state of calm, which of course can only come from wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah. It can only come in from a deep insight of the nature of reality. You're so in tune with the fact that everything's impermanent and changing that it just doesn't surprise you when it's not, and you're just at peace with the fact that things change.
Yes, it is. What you're bringing up is powerful. This idea that dispassion and equanimity, these words that have been so integral to Eastern philosophy, yet haven't really been as important or as salient in Western science of psychology. It's a big stone to unturned. I want to talk a little bit about the complementarity between science and spirituality. We discussed this a little bit on email. This idea that Buddhism, as you've said, is not blind faith. It's based on experience. And interestingly, Vedanta is very similar. They talk about experience as the mode to finding truth. Now, there are many practices in Buddhism that help you do this. Vipassana, samatha, I would love for you to explain to us how these practices provide the observations that we need, the experience we need to help us understand this is more of a science than we might think it is.
Yeah. So as I say, I mean, I think Buddhism and science are both motivated by an uncompromising search for truth, which I think is very similar. And I think they both believe fundamentally that things don't happen randomly. So I mean, there's so many different schools of Buddhism that from the outside look so different. I mean, if you compare like a monastery in Tibet where they're all banging drums and blowing trumpets, living in the mountains, to say a monastery in Myanmar or Sri Lanka where they're just living a very simple life, or a Zen monastery in Japan, etc. But Buddhism can look so different. But the fundamental truth, the fundamental dogma, if you like, of Buddhism, which lies at the heart of every school, is the idea of pratichet samutpada, which means, as you say, everything is in a constant state of flux, everything is impermanent, and everything influences everything. So everything is interconnected. And again, I think this is what science shows us again and again and again. And I think what Buddhism and science both say is, well, I mean, from scientific experiment, conduct the scientific experiments and see what the results are. Buddhism would say, well, the Buddha said, you should not take what I say on blind faith. You should test my teachings in the fire of your own experience. So I think that what both Buddhism and science say is, well, you need to experience it. You need to have the evidence before you believe it. But at the same time, just because it's not part of your experience doesn't mean that you should reject it. You should be open-minded to the fact that, well, you could be wrong, or there are, things that you have yet to be experienced. So you can just be open-minded about it. And I think the way Buddhism approaches that is that it says that if your mind is troubled and turbulent and just agitated, well, you can't see things as they really are, because basically reality, presents itself to you through the senses, so through sight and hearing and sound and thoughts, etc. But what happens is that we, because of our craving and our opinions, we twist everything. We twist everything to see things from our own perspectives. So the idea is that with samatha meditation, which is generally around mindfulness, but also around generating loving kindness, is that we calm the mind, we let the mind settle, so that when reality presents itself to us, we can actually see what it is. It's like, the simile is that if you look into a lake and the water is all choppy because of the wind, you can't see into the depths. Whereas if your mind is calm, well, then you can see into the depth and you can see things as they really are. So samatha meditation is all about calming the mind so that you can actually interpret reality properly, if you like. And then vipassana meditation is generally, where you, once you've calmed your mind, you actually start to reflect, well, what is the nature of reality? So you can reflect on impermanence. I mean, a very beautiful practice that I like is what's called the 6 element practice, where you reflect that your body and everything is made of elements, and how there is a constant exchange between yourself and the outside world. So all the time you're bringing things into your body, you're eating, you're drinking, you're breathing in air. So literally every time you breathe, your body changes. And then at the same time, every time that you go to the toilet, or skin's flaking off your body, water is evaporating off your body in terms of sweat, et cetera, et cetera. There's this continuous exchange between you and the outside world. And actually they've now shown that every 7 years, your entire body is recycled. There's not a single atom in your body
Wow.
that was here 7 years ago. So you literally, you know, who I am today just didn't exist at all 7 years ago. And that, so of course, so those kind of what are called vipassana practices, where you're really, really kind of taking reality on, but in the context of a calm mind, and also a mind which is imbued with love and positivity, because those kind of experiences, when you really see into that, can really freak you out, because you realize that reality really is not what it seems at all. And that even the idea of ourselves as a fixed thing moving through space and time, which we all just take for granted, isn't true at all. And whether you're a scientist or a Buddhist doing meditation, you can see that. But when you actually realize that, it can be very, very frightening. So yeah, Vipassana meditation practices are where you really reflect on the on impermanence and interconnectedness, to help bring you more in line with reality. And of course, once you see the world in that way, well, then you are seeing things as they really are, and you will suffer less, because your whole mode of being is more in tune with the way things actually are. But you do need to have that calmness of mind, the contentment, and the emotional positivity in order to be able to do that. And I think this is one of the things that I'm a bit skeptical about, is when you hear people who have really never practiced Buddhism or meditation before, and they go away and they do these 10 days Vipassana meditation retreats, who never meditated before. Basically most people experience it as an extremely unpleasant experience. But I think because they don't have that body of practice and samatha practice, those insights can't go very deep. So you really, I think you need to have both. Yeah.
How insightful. And I know personally so many people who have done Vipassana retreats, and I have yet to hear about this idea of really needing ease before you go into it. The ease, the letting go of the mind, the peace in the mind that creates the impact that Vipassana really wants to make, or should have on you. Possibly they're not getting the experience that they're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of us being connected to nature and the connectivity of us with everything around us, it stands in contrast to what we believe now in a world that is highly competitive, that is based on comparison. We often fuel distrust because we don't believe we are connected to each other and to the earth. There is a beautiful philosopher, essayist, and poet of the 19th century in America. His name is Ralph Waldo Emerson. I don't know how much you know of his work. I enjoy it immensely because he had a book of the Bhagavad Gita in his hand. One of his friends gave it to him in the mid-19th century. And from there, he began speaking about transcendentalism and this idea that, you know, there is truth really within us. This idea that we shouldn't believe without evidence. All the things we're talking about, he was speaking about in the mid-19th century. And I want to read you one of his quotes. He says, "The soul rules over matter. The soul rules over matter." And what he's getting at is limitations of Newtonian science. So this idea of, you know, is there a limit to the way we are looking at the world through the lens of Newtonian science, through the lens of matter? Is there something bigger and not measurable that we're missing? So the question really is, how can spirituality bring us better answers to humanity's search for inner happiness and peace?
I mean, again, these are big questions. I have to say, this is one of the few questions that is unresolved in me as a Buddhist, because and I think it's where Buddhism and science do differ, is that science generally states that matter is primary, and that basically consciousness arises on the basis of matter. That without having a brain and a body, you can't have consciousness. Whereas at least some schools of Buddhism would say it's the other way around. That consciousness comes first, and that consciousness precedes matter, and it's something that I haven't resolved in my own mind, really. But in terms of so just to clarify your question again, so you're saying how can
spirituality, how can these ideas, whether it's in Buddhism or Vedic traditions or in any traditional religious or spiritual traditions, how can those ideas help us get the answers that we're looking for, that perhaps science isn't able to help us with, in terms of finding that inner peace and happiness? And we talked about a bit of that early on, but this idea that perhaps we're just not giving spirituality enough value in.
Yeah, look, I think that's so I guess the answer to my question for that are really practices. So I think one thing that religion has, all religions, whether they're theistic or non-theistic or Eastern or Western, is a code of ethics. And I think that's something that's a very important aspect of that science doesn't necessarily present. Because I think when you meditate, and whether you're doing samatha or vipassana practices, when you meditate, anybody who has meditated will have experienced this, is you come up against your conscience pretty quickly. And so all of those regrets, all of those behaviors that we know cause ourselves suffering and cause others suffering, they really start to become apparent, and you start to feel really shameful about it. And I think that this is why ethics are so important. It's so important that we can have a clear conscience, and the only way to really have a clear conscience is to live in a kind and compassionate way. And I think that's something that Buddhism, in particular, really does bring. I think mindfulness is another really, really important way, because I run quite a lot of mindfulness activities for frontline health workers, so people who are working in high stress hospital departments. And I think one of the things that we do as human beings is that we get very caught up in the past. So we hold a lot of resentment and anger about things that have happened to us, or we crave those kind of past experiences when everything was wonderful. But as far as I know, no one's invented a time machine yet, and we can't change the past. So we have to accept it. Now, if we've been traumatized by the past, then yes, we might need to go back with a psychotherapist or a counselor and relive those experiences in order to come to terms with them. But generally speaking, we have to learn to let the past go. And at the same time, we also spend a lot of time worrying or craving of the future. So a lot of anxiety about, well, what am I going to do? What happens if my husband dies and I can't pay the mortgage anymore? All these fears that we have about the future, and all these cravings about winning the lottery or winning a Nobel Prize. But again, the future, and the older you get, you realize the future is so unpredictable. We just don't know what's going to happen in the future. But the reality is, the only thing that we ever experience is the present moment. And I think the more we can engage with the present moment, and the more that we can find ways of being content in the present moment and finding joy in the present moment and not seeing the present moment as boring, right? Well, then that by definition will fundamentally transform our lives, because if we're happier in the present, then we're happier. And I think mindfulness is an extremely powerful tool to do that. So I lead a lot of walking meditations, for example, where I ask people to focus on their feet and then focus on maybe feeling the sensations of their trousers moving against their legs, or looking for a color that they particularly enjoy. But the point is looking for something in your present experience that is enjoyable. So looking for those simple pleasures, even if you're really stressed and you're running between, you're in an ICU department or a labour ward and you've got 6 people giving birth and you're short-staffed, where can you find happiness and contentment in the present moment? What's your favourite colour? Red. Well, look for something red. Feel your feet pressing into the floor, whatever it happens to be. So I think mindfulness, and there's a lot of, it's really a buzzword now, mindfulness, but there is now evidence that mindfulness helps with anxiety, helps with depression, helps with chronic pain, because it's bringing you to the present moment, and it's something that you have to practice, and the more you can habitualize it, well, the happier you will be. So I think mindfulness and a code of ethics are really important, and in fact they are really what that really is the groundwork, I would argue, to a meditation practice, because it's not really until you can learn to enjoy the present moment and really resolve your conscience, at least improve your conscience, that when you do close your eyes and meditate, you don't feel like you're just this horrible person. You think, no, I am a person who's making an effort. Yeah, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to better myself. Well, that's when your mind will calm and be settled, and that's when you'll get insight. So I think there are 2 things. But one thing I do think there, which I wanted to mention, is one of my favorite historical figures in science is Albert Einstein. Yeah. And I think Albert Einstein, obviously, he first of all, he came up with the theory of special relativity, which is the kind of E equals mc squared, and the interrelationship between matter and energy. And then, of course, when he added gravity to that theory, he came up with a theory of general relativity, which is where space and time bend, and that's what gravity is, and all of those kind of things. But what I love about Albert Einstein was he wasn't really a mathematician. So most physicists and people working on these big things do it through maths. Albert Einstein used his imagination as much as he did maths. And when you read some of the non-scientific quotes, that Albert Einstein came up with, which directly came from his theories on physics, some of them really blow you away. So I printed one of them out. So this is a quote by Albert Einstein in 1950. So this is well after he had come up with his theories of special relativity and general relativity. But he says, a human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to the affection for a few people nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in his beauty. And to me, there's the living proof that there's a connection between these advanced scientific theories and religion, because you couldn't put that better, really. He's basically encapsulated Buddhism without being a Buddhist, but that's come from an understanding of the nature of reality. So there's hundreds of quotes by Einstein similar to that. So he's the perfect example.
Absolute perfect model for the blending of the two, and for the necessity to do so. Dr. Harman, I'm going to stop at this final question, and I thank you so much again for your time. This has really been a pleasure. You know, we talked a lot about the definition of happiness being re-examined. The definition of success, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, also must be re-examined for us to truly find that space of peace. I'd love for you to tell us, if you could, what your definition of success is currently. You know, it changes when we're in our 20s, we have a certain definition, much different than when we become parents and as we age. What's your definition now?
So I think my definition of success ultimately is to have an equanimous mind, equanimity. But I think to put that in a more practical sense, I think it's psychological integration. And what I mean by that is that there's many different parts to ourselves. We have many different bits to ourselves. So, you know, I'm a father, I have 3 children, I'm a husband, I run a research group, I'm a meditation teacher, I'm a PhD supervisor. I have lots and lots and lots of different roles in my life, and they all compete with each other. And I think what can happen is that we can have a lot of inner conflict because Andrew or Shantideva, the father, might want, and husband might want different things to Shantideva Andrew, the Buddhist, who'd like to go meditate. And again, that will be very different to Andrew Harman, the scientist, who wants to win a Nobel Prize or be the best scientist ever. And I think one of the things that meditation and mindfulness really does is it brings all of those parts of ourselves together into a more consistent whole. So we become more psychologically integrated, and we have much less inner conflict. So I think for me, success is being able to truly know ourselves and to truly know all the bits of ourselves, and for all of those parts of ourselves to be working together in harmony. So to me, I think that is equanimity. That is a big part of equanimity. That you can be part of a global pandemic where everyone's going crazy. We're living in truly unprecedented times. You can be part of you can have a chaotic life, but maintain your inner composure and maintain at least more equanimity than perhaps you could have done previously. So to me, that would be my definition of success, which I think ties into everything that we've spoken about today.
Indeed. Thank you all for listening, and you can learn more about Dr. Harman by visiting the University of Sydney School of Medical Sciences website. We'll leave the link in the show notes, and you can also find his work on LinkedIn by visiting his page. In partnership with the World Happiness Festival, we'd like you to consider being a part of a global community of leaders, institutions, and individuals working to realize 10 billion happy people by the year 2050.
What are the barriers to happiness? How do we heal? How do we maximize our potential? How do we remember who we are? How can we be of service to the world? Join the World Happiness Fest, the largest forum of happiness and well-being in the world. Visit us at www.worldhappiness.foundation. We are realizing a world with freedom, consciousness, and happiness for all.
Wishing each and every one of you a great week ahead. Next up, we'll be talking to Agapi Stasinopoulos, author of the new book, Speaking with Spirit. If you love episodes like this one and want to learn more about how to find calm in your life and the freedom to be your best, join my newsletter over on LinkedIn or at our website, calmandfreepodcast.com, or via our social channels. Thanks as always to Charlene at Go2 Productions and Jessica Panion for art design. And please email or text this episode to someone you love.